And we've got a fantastic panel. So we've got Carmelo here in New York. He would have liked to have been here because any excuse to come to the UK. but Mrs. Bueti's about 37, 38 weeks pregnant or something. So he thought it'd be wise to remain in New York today.
Yeah, I didn't want my marriage to end for this seminar, so I decided not to make the trip.
Okay. And we had Chris Price, who I've known for who knows,
since I had that,
an incredibly long time. And then we had Emma Thorne, who we did a deal with last year. We did the EVORA deal with last year, and the EVORA deal was a sale of a fantastic consulting business in real assets, which has happened, was co-owned by Paul here, who's going to share his experience of what it was like to be on the other side. And then I'll speak a little bit later if I need to. Then these guys will probably cover it all off actually. So and then we'll have a Q&A session. Also in the room we've got Richard Hall, my business partner, and he'll join the Q&A session. And we've got Nick, who's very kindly given us this location at 1 minute's notice, and Vicky, a colleague of Nick's, and these two worked and supported Paul in the transaction with EVORA. Yeah. And I think I've got most people in the room except for this man over here, Peter. And Peter is a wealth manager at Coots. And we'll guest with him today. So Ollie over here is our BD guy and has put all these slides together and will be driving it. So there we go. That's the introduction on what we're hoping to do. So Ollie, if you could just flick onto the next slide. So that's a bit about me. You don't need to know about that. Lots of deals. Been doing it for about 33 years. It's I don't feel long in the tooth yet. Just feel like getting better at it, to be honest. Which wouldn't be that hard. So if we go to the next slide, right? So I think what drives value in consulting businesses, and you're going to be the people speaking to you today will pick up each of these items, yeah, and talk through it and talk through how they look at it, and hopefully tell you about things that don't work for them. So customer concentration, niches, what KPIs have you got in your business that you can demonstrate to bidders and investors that they can watch the growth of the business, they can see how you're developing your business. What are the things you look at? What are the things they're going to look at? What are the quality of your earnings? I mean, yesterday I was sat in a meeting with a consulting business, and in that consulting business they're currently providing services into a specific area, and the question went, well, if we keep providing services in this specific area, how long is the specific service going to last? Yeah, and if that isn't going to last for many years because there'll be a replacement service, what do we need to be doing to getting ourselves ready for that change or any legislative change that might occur? And that sparked a really interesting conversation about, well, actually, is there a product we can do that meets the legislative requirement or reporting requirement for people in the sector going forwards? And suddenly there was a discussion about quite a different looking business. And the look of that business would have ended up with a business, let's say, with a multiple in the early teens to mid-teens, because it would be a regulated reporting, commoditized, not quite commoditized, but specialist but commoditized, scalable business, as opposed to relying on people going to places to do stuff within the consulting practice. So we had a bit of a chat about that, and that's the sort of thing we could be thinking about in our businesses years before we get to sell them, do a transaction, or when we're raising money. So how are we going to build value? How are we going to really get people excited? Because that's the stuff that the investors and buyers around this table are most interested in. Yeah, the scalability, competitive environment, etc. So I'm going to hand over now to Carmelo. So if you pull up Carmelo. Carl, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the slides up in my screen too, so don't feel the need to share them. I'll force you all to stare at my face on the big screen, so I apologize for that. But yeah, Carmelo Boetti, I'm Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at JS Held. Very, very quick on my background. I'm actually a recovering investment banker. So I did that for a number of years, worked on a number of initial public offerings, follow-on offerings, and primarily advising private company sales. About 4 years ago, I moved over to JSL to really professionalize the acquisition efforts here. In the 4 years that I've been at JSL, we've done about 40 acquisitions, all in the professional services and consulting space. JS Held has actually been around for 50 years, but it really developed a presence in London in the past 2 years, thanks to Polestar, who has sold us or advised on the sale of 2 businesses to us. So we are funding Charlie's lifestyle, just so you all know.
Thank you.
We're the reason for that. No, but Charlie is obviously, and the Polestar team is a fantastic bank, and we really value the relationship. So we do not only more traditional technical consulting, right, engineering, construction advisory, things of that nature, but we also work in the investigation space. So, anti-money laundering, fraud, forensic accounting, whatever it may be. So moving on to the slides with that as a background for what JS Held is, we are a strategic acquirer. We have a private equity backer, so we're a bit of a hybrid, but that they're really the ones that are providing the funding, but the decision making is all ours. So in terms of the viewpoint that I'm coming at this from, it's truly as a strategic acquirer, and things that we look at when we're looking at private company acquisition. Starting from left to right. Of course, financial strength is important, and I'll let those in the private equity world in the room kind of talk more about it. But in terms of what we like to see, it's sustained revenue growth, right? It's not just, hey, there's one huge year because of one large project or one large client. We like to see continued revenue growth. So very often we'll find companies come to market off of the backs of one good year, trying to get some, really strong valuation. But of course, you have to show that that's not just a flash in the pan, and that it's more sustainable. And as you're growing, profitability and maintaining profitability is important, right? There are certain levers you can pull, but you have to show that you're not just growing at any cost. You have to show that you're doing it profitably. Anybody can hire 100 people and grow 100%, but if you have negative margins, then perhaps you're not as responsible of an owner. Something that I do think is important, and this is the delicate balance between profitability and growth, is if you look at any sort of regression analysis off of company valuation, the number one variable, contrary to most people's belief, it's not profitability, it's not growth. Of course, those things influence valuation. But if you can prove that you can build a business of scale, right? And of course, you're consistently growing and profitability is not completely out the door, you will command the highest valuation possible. It is proof that there is a market for your service. So getting to that scale is important in terms of obtaining higher multiples for the business. I touched on the concentration point, right? A business that's 10 million of revenue with 8 million coming from one client or one project is really risky. So the need to diversify your revenues across multiple clients is paramount, right? It can't just be a one client business, or many acquirers are going to get quite nervous during diligence. And then lastly, the best advice that I've ever been given, and therefore gave to my clients when I was actually sell-side advisor, was always run the business as if you're ready to sell it tomorrow. Quality of financial information, making sure that you don't have what I call the check my checkings account at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year type of accounting. That you're regularly looking at the figures, you have financial controls in place. Even if you're a smaller business, you should always be ready to sell the business, because you never know who's going to come knocking on your door. And it'll give an acquirer confidence in the numbers, and therefore you'll be able to get to an eventual transaction very quickly, and the acquirer will be able to do it in a more confident manner. Now, I think unique to maybe the strategic acquisition or the strategics making acquisitions is strategic and cultural fit, right? It's not just the financials, and I call that permission to play. Of course, you need to have good financial profile. But in my world, the most important diligence session is the one where we take out the owners of a business out for a meal or a drink, right? Because typically the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And, when you're able to understand what makes a company tick, right? Hey, there's low employee attrition. The owner of the business is not just looking to ride off into the sunset post-close. The owner of a business actually wants to continue to grow. Perhaps there are levers that the owner of the business could pull, but hasn't because, the money has to come out of your pocket. And if you have a new strategic partner, that Rolodex of rainmaking hires that you've always wanted to make, but you haven't really had the stomach to take the risk, or the pipeline of M&A potential candidates that you've always wanted to maybe merge with or acquire, kind of having that list ready. So when somebody does come knocking, you can say, hey, it's not just, you're not just acquiring company X, Y, or Z, but it's our relationships. It's our path to go from $1 of revenue to $5 of revenue overnight, right? Sorry, I speak in dollars. I'm in the US. So, it's not, like I said, it's not just the financial strength. It's very much cultural. It's that growth mindset. It's well, if I did have money to spend, could I do I have a plan for it, right? What's my growth strategy? What have I not been able to do simply because I haven't necessarily had the capital to do it? And then, most important for a strategic acquirer, makes sense, strategic fit. I talked a bit about the appetite for hires and acquisitions, but is the market that you're servicing, is it a really small niche market, right? Is the addressable market only a few million, or is it a multi-billion-dollar industry? And if it's on the smaller side, what are you doing to get into markets where there is more room for growth? Have you considered making a hire in an adjacent market to double or triple the revenue possibilities, right? And is that an area that you have the right to kind of gain market share in? And then finally, the last thing that I'll talk about is scalability, right? I talked about how the greater the scale of a business, the greater the valuation. Are you built to grow, right? Do you have the systems in place to be able to double, triple, quadruple revenue, or are you still kind of running the business out of your garage without the controls in place to experience the type of growth that hopefully a strategic acquirer can bring to the business? This is really what I wanted to talk about. Hopefully it's a bit different of a slant to the to kind of what a strategic acquirer looks for versus a pure financial. I think very often folks think the M&A world is one where there's an acquirer and they try to cut costs to gain some type of arbitrage on a business in terms of profitability, but it couldn't be further from the truth, especially in the strategic acquisition world, where we're trying to make 1 + 1 = something more than 2 by growing revenue and by doing it responsibly. So Charlie, I'm not sure if there's anything else that you wanted me to hit for the group here, but it's great to meet you all virtually, and hope to at some point through Polestar or some other venue meet you all in person.
No, that's great, Carmelo. And I think you're going to be able to stay on, aren't you, for the Q&A session at the end? Absolutely. So I'm sure we'll get plenty to talk about during that as well. And if people got questions, write them down and we can fire in. And in fact, a question I'd like us to be answering when we get to the Q&A session, there's a view, isn't there, out there that private equity are in there because they want to cut costs and they want to asset strip, and that's people say, well, if I sell my business, then then they're going to want to fire everybody, and how do I control that? And that may be true sometimes, but the question I think I know the answer already, but the question I'm going to ask the people who are around this table is, how many deals have you done when you were aiming to cut costs and see? It's all about the synergies. It's not about something else. So it'd be interesting to have an honest discussion on that later. Okay, so Chris, you're next.
So I'm Chris. I'm a partner at Mobeus Equity Partners. We're a lower mid-market private equity firm. So what does that really mean? We manage our clients' money. Our clients are pension funds, charitable foundations, university banks, those types of organisations. They give us their money, and we go out and we try and invest that money into UK-based businesses. And the easiest way to classify them is on a size basis. So the companies we invest in are typically making somewhere between 1 and 5 million profit at the bottom. We invest in those businesses. We look to grow them, realise those investments over the next 5 to 10 years, and then hand back the money plus profit to our investor base. So our model is all about identifying interesting businesses, platforms, as we might call them, making those investments, and then helping them grow over a period of time. We always join the board. We always get involved in the strategic decision. So it's with that context, I'll try and say a few words. We've sort of been through our own corporate transactions ourselves as well. We've actually had 2 buyouts in our history. Our last one was a couple of years ago, and it's amazing how badly 4 supposed experts in doing transactions can do their own thing. So it was a good lesson in humility for us. So if we flip on to the next slide, I've got a bit of a brain dump of thoughts here, and I'll pick up a couple from each section. And then on the next slide, I've got a couple of examples of consultancy deals that we've done. We are a generalist investor, so we've invested across financial services, travel, manufacturing, consumer products. So personally, over the last couple of years, I've led, I think, 4 consultancy sector deals. So this has been an area that we've been very focused on. When we look at the UK economy, in terms of the things we export well, human capital and consultancy skills is one of those things that we think as a country we do very well. So we've been doing quite a number of deals. Probably the first point I'm going to pick up is really indicative of a bit of what Charlie's question is hinting at, which is, why do we do deals and how do we do these deals? I've said we invest across a range of sectors, so I can't ever walk to a table claiming to be the expert in an underlying industry. The first thing we look for, and the only absolute requirement in any deal we do at Mobeus, is people. We have to be able to understand who it is we're backing. Who are the people that are going to have the strategy and put forward the initial plan to take this business forward? Now, we'll prod, we'll poke, we'll challenge it, but if there isn't somebody there wanting to lead that transaction, then it's not a deal that might be seen in play. So as a vendor, if you're thinking about selling a business, that succession planning piece is probably the most important thing you've got to be focused on to a transaction if you want it to end up being a private equity deal. We'll dig into one of the challenges we see coming through the consultancy firms we work with is the hiring piece. As you get into growth in this private equity, we will be looking to see reasonable growth coming through the business. How are you going to get more people coming through your business? What's your hiring mechanism? Do you have an internal hiring function? Do you have some kind of academy where you're training people, bringing them through the business? How are you managing that process? People are a great resource, but also pain in the ass. We all know that. How are we dealing with those problems? And being able to articulate your strategic hiring plan for your business over the next few years is really fundamental to being able to articulate how and why you can grow. I'll pick up on the operating model next, because as a smaller company investor, it would be extremely arrogant of me to think that I can walk in and buy a generalist management consultancy and think that business is going to be able to take over the world and consistently grow. There are so many other large generalist management consulting firms out there. What we're looking for is niche expertise. Now, that niche can be defined in all sorts of different ways, but unless you can define a unique proposition, it's probably private equity is not for you. And so when we flip over, and I'll talk about the next slide, I'll try and show how we were thinking about that with a few of our companies. Once you can define your niche, you can also define why you justify your existence. Why is it that people should pay you for your services, and why can you generate a premium margin for doing those services? So being able to articulate that up front, really important. And then you get into the guts of the operating. And when we talk to consultancy firms, there's always a real debate. What sort of revenues do you really have? Are you a body shop? Are you just providing bodies to fill a gap for a company? Are you providing a real value add that nobody else can do? One of the companies on the other side is a business called Access Partnership. It was a deal we did a few years ago. We subsequently sold it. And their whole business was around helping technology businesses with regulatory challenges all over the world. And their customers were the likes of Twitter, Facebook, and other major technology corporations around the world. And then we go to Access and we'd say, what are the data regulations in Nigeria? What are the data regulations in Belgium? Or what are the X regulation in and around the technology sphere? And they were able to answer those questions for those clients. Now, that was a nice niche, but the thing that made it really attractive for us is their competitors were the large US law firms. There are some law firms, like the one we're in, that are very reasonable, charge a fair amount for a fair day's work. There are others in the US where you're being charged £1,000 an hour for a senior partner. Now, if you're a consultancy firm based in London and you don't have the office infrastructure and the cost base that's associated with a law firm, you can make fantastic money charging £350, £450, £500 an hour, and you can be really competitive in the market. And so it's understanding that proposition. Why are you different? How are you able to charge differently? And why can you justify making that money? Carmelo touched on a couple of things that will always be questions we'll look at. Concentration issues within the customer base is absolutely fundamental. If it goes beyond about 30-35%, it's going to cause a problem for your biggest customer. And if your top 5 customers are getting up towards 60-70%, there's going to be questions. So if you're in that position, it's all about breaking it down into manageable segments. So we're regularly having conversations with consultancy firms. They'll come in and say, right, this customer is 40% of the business, but there are 10 different purchase decision makers within that organization. If we lost this one, there's no reason for us to lose others. You've got to stack your arguments up. You've got to be prepared for that question. You can't necessarily change your business that quickly. So sometimes you just got to suck it up. You've got to go to market with that as an issue. You've got to have your answers ready. Don't walk into the room and make up a goal for which one question does. Is a good thing. I'll touch on the financials. We're financial investors. We're gonna dig into the numbers. It's the painful part. The last 2 deals in consulting that I've done have both been over 20% bottom line margin. Why? It shows a business that has got that niche. If you're making 5-10% EBITDA margin, you've really got to be able to scale that top line. You've got to be able to scale that top line really quickly. You've got to drive huge scale through that business to be able to justify the types of returns we're looking for. If you're higher margin, walk into the room with real confidence because you've got something special about your business. The thing to watch out for, though, is are you properly invested? Every business we look at, we're looking at saying, is there a CFO? Are the functions actually embedded in this business that mean this is a business that is a platform that we can scale? If it is, you're going to get a really premium multiple. If it isn't, the multiple's going to get eroded a bit because we know we're going to have to put that extra cost in. We usually have to put 2 or 3 senior heads into every business we invest in. If we find one that we don't, we get a premium price. So invest in your infrastructure. So why don't we jump over onto the next slide, and I'll just pick up on a couple of these. So Access Partnership is on the top right there is one of the businesses I mentioned. So business making north of 20% bottom line margin. It's in the tech space. It's got a real ability to go internationally. It's solving a problem and answering and solving that problem for businesses on a truly international basis. The deal we did was an equity release. So the management team there, they wanted to take some cash at the time. And this is a problem we see a lot as a private equity investor. There's a management team that have grown a business. The shares in their business are the single biggest asset they have in their lives, and it becomes quite intimidating. And it can actually start to act as a bit of an inhibitor for growth. One answer to that is sell the business. The other answer to that is do a sort of halfway house or a best of both worlds type deal. In this case, the team took 50% of their money off the table, and we ended up buying about 35% of the equity. So we created a pot of shares to help them incentivize other members of the team. They maintained majority control of the business, so we weren't stepping in with big boots to take ownership of the business. We were a minority partner to them. What we realised was that this business really needed more scale. They had an office in Washington, they had London, they had a very small office in Belgium, and they had a registered address in West Africa. Asia was the real focus for the business. such a hotbed of technology innovation. So we went out looking for acquisitions. We helped them find 2 acquisitions in Singapore. Now, we took that business from 2.5 to 8 million of EBITDA in 2.5 years. It was exceptional growth. You know, we can't take credit for that. That was great management of the business. Those 2 acquisitions only delivered about 1.5 million of that growth. So not that fundamental to changing the profitability of the business. But what it did was it changed the way that we worked. And it was really fundamentally shifting the value proposition the way other buyers looked at the business. So what we're looking for when we look at companies about to make investments, what are the levers we can pull to help this business grow? Is it an acquisition? Is it about internationalization? Is it about scale? Is it about another vertical or another leg to the stool that the business has? Can we strengthen it? In this case, it was about that, and it enabled us to sell again. And actually, the management team, we sold on to a larger private equity firm. They took their 50% off the table, and they went again, and they still own that business, and they're taking it forward. And they've just worked out that they can continue to keep going. And to seller, I'm just going to touch on that one very briefly, and then I will shut up. But to seller, this is a business we sold out of a few years ago now, but to seller was stuffed full of maths PhDs. They were there to solve problems for R&D departments of some of the biggest businesses in the world, where their own R&D department can solve. So they went into CERN and solved some sums that the guys at CERN couldn't solve. They went into a consumer products business and they adapted radar technology to measure hair follicle growth so that they could prove that the hair removal cream that business sold was better than the plan. So we're using complex maths to solve these types of problems. We had a great business. It was growing, and we knew we were going to sell it to another consultancy group. Fine. In the background on one of their projects, they developed a piece of technology which they called Preservica. And it was a piece of technology they used for the British Library to help them preserve documents, digital documents, where the software was going out of license, and you might not be able to access that document in the future. And we realized together that actually in Preservica, we had something that could be a standard product. So we managed to spin that out into a separate company. We funded that business separately. The same shareholder group was still together. That business is now a 10 million ARR software business based out of the States. It's aiming for 20 million of ARR. It's going to be another big win. So it's about looking around your business and trying to identify pockets of value. Where can we find the glitter to sprinkle over the top of this proposition? What are the things that are going to get a financial buyer interested in and really go to that growth? So that's a few of the things that we're thinking about. Happy to pick up on any results of.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Charlie, can I just double down on 2 points that Chris said?
Please do.
The first is succession planning. I don't think folks realize how important that is, especially with businesses that are kind of at the size of many that are being considered for acquisition. There's routinely, especially in the professional services world, key person risk. It's typically founder led, or there's 1 or 2 kind of original owners of the business, and they originate a lot of the work. And if you don't have a well-built, well thought out plan around how that revenue is going to pass to the next generation at your business, it's going to be difficult to get it, to get somebody to come to the table at all. So I think that's maybe the most important thing to be as you run a business for a whole bunch of reasons, not just to be acquired, but in terms of just the longevity of the business. And then number 2 is I think he really outlined the delicate balance between revenue growth and EBITDA margins. In the software world, there's something called the rule of 40, where you add the revenue growth to your EBITDA margin. And in the past, it was rule of 40. I think today it's probably more like rule of 60 because there's a higher emphasis on profitability than ever. But if you are growing like a weed and your EBITDA margins aren't 20+%, that's okay. On the other hand, if you're not growing like a weed and your EBITDA margins are 40%, that's also fantastic. So that's kind of that delicate balance that I think Chris outlined really, really well. So I just wanted to piggyback on those 2 things. And thanks, Chris. I think that was an amazing overview, and I missed a few of those points.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's some more that would have been missed, which Emma's going to pick up. So so as I say, Emma came through a very grueling process to win EVORA, and I think a key feature, and this is something which I wouldn't really think of talking about, but actually I'm reminded, is buyers showing commitment that they really want to transact is something that you'll recognise if and when you try and do a deal. And people say, who's the right one? Is it the right one who wants to pay the highest price? Is it the one who's going to do this? Is it the one that's going to do that? And my advice is it should be the one you think is going to be best for your business. And now talk to your corporate finance advisor and get them to get you the price that's close enough to the one you're going to do the deal with the person you want to do it. And I'd say one of the reasons why Bridges won this, deal with EVORA, and I'll let you speak to it more, though, is that the commitment that Emma showed me, she did not get off the phone to me during the process. You know,
That's punishment,
right? I mean, proper.
It was too late, Charlie.
Sorry? Yeah, and then when these guys said they really want to do the deal with them, then I wouldn't get off the phone to her. Right? So it was interesting, and Carmelo has been the same. He's shown commitment when he wanted to do a deal on that. You know, so I think when you're looking at it from your side, you're trying to do a transaction in your business. These guys should be keen to invest in your business or buy your business, or they're the wrong people. So Emma, who was very keen, over to you. Yeah.
Thanks for that introduction. So I'm a partner at Bridges Fund Management, which is a private equity firm with a bit of a difference in that we were founded 20 years ago as one of the first investors to think about how you can invest not only for market rate returns, but aligning those with measurable and positive social and environmental outcomes. So really thinking, can't private equity and the broader investment community start to think about how you address some of these big challenges that we face rather than just leaving it up to governments and philanthropy, which in 2002 was quite a different idea about how to invest. And probably for the first decade of Bridges, that was sort of pushing water uphill, I'd say, in terms of people trying to understand what we did. But it's something that has gained massive momentum over the last decade. I'm sure some of you or many of you will be familiar with this term of impact investing, which has sort of been coined, and we were one of the early movers in that whole movement. So we've got two flagship strategies: our private equity strategy, which is where I sit, which is actually, in terms of the situations and companies we're investing, quite similar to what Chris just described in terms of the size of businesses and what we're looking for, which I can go into in a bit more detail in a minute. And then alongside that, but with a clear outcome focus, which I'm on to, and alongside that, we've also got a real estate strategy, and that is actually how I first spotted the EVORA team, because EVORA are the absolute go-to experts in terms of how in real estate investors should be thinking about sustainability and providing a whole range of solutions to them. And it was their reputation within our property investment team that took me to them in the first place, and which is why I started hounding Charlie down, as well as Paul and Chris at a very early stage. And then before Bridges, I was at a fund called Phoenix Equity Partners, which is a bit more of a generalist low mid-market private equity investor. And so just before we go on to the next slide, I guess in terms of what we are looking for in terms of the companies that we're investing, it is all about a very clear alignment and lockstep between the core commercial value proposition and the ability to deliver those positive measurable outcomes. So we're really looking for what we call a lockstep between the two, so that we know that by growing and scaling a business and hopefully doubling or tripling profitability over that life cycle, and also growing, we very much hope the valuation multiple given scale, as Chris talked to, as well as building a better, more resilient business. By doing that, we will be scaling and deepening the outcome that it delivers. And if you don't have that sort of core lockstep, then you can start to get some quite difficult sort of trade-offs as you grow. So that's a really important lens that we think about. At the same time as those core outcomes, we're then also building what we would term as an ESG leader, a best-in-class approach to ESG, and that's taking that more holistic view as well then to social and environmental impacts across the board, as well as that core outcome that we're thinking about. I've invested in 2 consultancy businesses in the last couple of years, so EVORA, which we'll come on to, and then also Talking Talent, which is a business that provides DE&I solutions to large corporates that are really struggling with how to retain and promote diverse talent, and then really help build those diverse talent pipelines, which is a big challenge that many businesses are grappling with at the moment. So if we go on to the next slide, I had a sneak preview of Chris's slide, which is very helpful, thank you. What Chris said is absolutely bang on and far more articulate than how I would describe it. So take all of that as read and listen to. What I'm going to now add is just a few more thoughts from that sort of that specific impact side, I guess. A few additional areas that we have to think about really carefully. And also, to be honest, I think all of these add to interesting investment opportunities and really should help underwrite and underpin the returns that we're targeting, which are no different from the returns that a Mobeus or anyone else will be targeting in terms of where we want to get to. There's not about a trade-off between the two, but it's about actually hopefully improving the outcome. So from a market perspective, this is particularly interesting. So we're always coming at this from what's the challenge from in terms of the social or environmental challenge. And I think what we've seen in particularly the last sort of 5 years, is this sort of massive growth momentum of what I call ESG services. So when you think about obviously the climate crisis and a whole swathe of regulation, as well as companies thinking we've got to do something about this for our own stakeholders, whether that's our shareholders or our employees, clearly a massive growth of businesses with the consultancy model, helping provide solutions to that, increasingly as well with a really important software component to it, given that this is such a kind of data-centric area, and that's really important, but also from a social perspective as well. So I guess that's interesting. Consultancy model gets interesting for us here in that this creates very clear niches, as Chris talked about, which helps you create quite a sort of very interesting specialised model quite quickly, with increasingly sort of quick growth potential, given the size of market opportunities that have become quite explosive. And they are also now increasingly backed by regulation, which again gives you that really nice, strong underpin, and sort of a very resilient and sort of large opportunity, particularly where you then see sort of geographies starting to align. So Europe, for example, has been a real leader from a regulatory perspective on the climate side. And in the case of EVORA, that's then seen, many US businesses or investors starting to need to align with what's been happening in Europe, because they've got multinational operations, or they're looking at that and then taking it as a sort of best practice approach as well. So the regulatory aspect is super interesting. And then what we're really thinking about from a proposition perspective is, well, how does this solve this challenge, and how is it going to deliver measurable positive outcomes? What's interesting about consultancy models from an impact perspective is that very often this is about indirect impact. And people are quite used to, in the impact world, sort of having the ability to say, okay, well, if I provide this service, I am directly offsetting, however many tons of CO2 it is. Clearly, with a consulting model, you are typically providing solutions and advice, or software as a service, which is going to sort of help. But you have to make some assumptions as to how much impact that's actually going to have, rather than directly taking it out of the air through a sort of asset-based approach. So we're often having to, before we invest, start to make some quite clear assumptions about what that logic model looks like and why that activity is going to deliver that outcome. We think that's really helpful, not only because it's important to our stakeholders, but actually that is in a really good way showing an ROI that actually you can talk about to your stakeholders. So if Paul and team can go and say to their clients, this is the impact that you are having in terms of your CO2 emissions reduction, or in the case of talking talent, we have increased our talent pipeline by X because of our activities. That's something you can hold up and show against a clearer ROI, often where that's quite difficult in consulting models. So we do see that real sort of benefit, I guess, of that measurement piece, and being much better at communicating it can then really help build the proposition. And then I guess a couple of other key points. So on the talent EVP side, I mean, this is all, I suspect, Chris, you look at this in exactly the same way. But this is clearly so important, particularly in these very hot, high growth, explosive growth sectors, ESG being a really good example. When we were looking at EVORA, one of the first questions I have in my investment committee was, well, how are they going to hold on to their talent? This is such hot. There's such hot demand for this. Why isn't a specialist ESG consultant going to go, in-house for a significantly larger salary, or go and be poached by a competitor? And I think this is where really having that clearly articulated purpose and really getting an understanding of the kind of culture and engagement side is so important. And actually we see time and time again that it's not just about having the highest salary, it's about that whole package to the employee that really makes them excited. And one of the things that we loved about EVORA and has become even clearer since investment is just sort of how strong that cultural piece is, and that kind of desire to be in a sort of family, particularly where you've got that impacts and that purpose, and you really feel like you are making a difference. So kind of, and how you build and scale that is then clearly a hugely important part going forward as well. And also how you can develop your own in-house talent. So again, if you're not having to rely on lateral hires, but you can actually grow that talent in-house, taking grads, putting them through the training program, then again, that's going to be a really good value driver. And again, something that we're impressed in terms of how we're thinking about that when we invested. From a scaling perspective, I think the impact angle on this is about that sort of ROI piece, and how by getting better at measurements and communicating it, you can sort of show that virtuous circle and really help build the whole model. But I think just alongside that, these are all sort of clear points that are relevant to everyone. But I think particularly this point about how you get from that key person reliance to a more scalable model is just so important. And I'd say normally that's, from a situation perspective, something that we sort of are well aware that there'll be a bit of a journey to go on. It's not necessarily all going to be in place at the start, but have you got those key individuals and that, I guess, kind of alignment and appetite to create that move on from an organisational structure perspective, and have a very clear view on sort of where we want to get to, and have sort of the same view on that. And then I thought I'd just put finally just a piece on that broader ESG part, because it is topical and relevant. I think here, pre-investment, we're not in any way looking for sort of perfection. It's much more, again, about alignment in terms of what are the thresholds that really matter, being really honest about where the business is. So rather than just trying to make sort of throwaway continual improvement measurements where you say, well done us, pat on the back, because from having one woman on the board, we've now got two, or whatever it is. Actually, let's just be really clear that if it's not 50-50, that's not great, but it's okay, but we're going to try and get there. And then equally, when we're thinking about gender pay gaps, where we are in terms of really understanding what the baseline is and what our targets are going to be on carbon reduction, scope 1, 2, 3, all the rest of it. It's not about you need to be at a certain level for us to invest, but it is about just having that clarity on what we're going to target, what we're going to measure, how we're going to talk about that as a board, and really importantly as well, how we're going to use that to really kind of help engage and communicate through the business. Because again, that coming back to the employee value proposition, that can be a really good hook to be showing that the board have focus and attach importance to that, and another way to elicit engagement. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that just gives another angle.
Just on that last point, the ESG point is something that is part of the toolkit that we deploy in every single portfolio companies now. Why? It's the right thing to do, but also it makes financial sense. And anybody that's preparing a business to start looking towards exit at the moment that doesn't stop and think about their ESG, how it will be perceived, what metrics they should be focusing on. The easy wins that they can target and the planning that they can put in place isn't going to maximise their value. I mean, from talking to lots of different advisors, there's a turn or two turns of EBITDA in terms of exit value that relate to whether you are considered to be a leading business in your space with regard to ESG metrics or not. And if you completely ignore it, which most companies still in the SME space are doing, then you'll suffer. And so that's why we're deploying every one of our portfolio companies. Every board has a tracker that they're measuring against monthly. They have their own bespoke targets that are working towards. We try and aggregate those and view those as at a fund level as well. Our investors require it of us, we require it of our portfolio, but it's not just box ticking, it goes to that.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that perspective. And the ESG thing you finished with, we did a Ollie organised a questionnaire which we had about 70 something replies on.
Yeah.
And that was seeing where there were about 20 PE firms responded and 50 corporates responded on and one of the questions was, do you think your business is worth more if you get this sorted? Yeah. And there was a big weight towards yes. There was also a big weight towards I haven't got a clue how to go about doing it, right? Okay, so the man who actually
Gone through it all. Okay, so this will be a bit different. So I'm an ESG consultant, a sustainability consultant. So what we just talked about, that's what we do. EVORA is a software and consultancy business. If you'd have asked me pre-deal, I'd have said a consultancy and a software business. That's key. And we've been going 12, 13 years. And prior to this, I was a practicing ESG consultant and initially worked with multidisciplinary consultancies and then moved into real estate. So I was head of sustainability, director of sustainability at DTZ. And whilst at DTZ, I worked very closely with two other guys, Chris Bennett and Ed Gabitas. And Chris came to me one day and said, I'm leaving and setting up a sustainability business. Do you want to come and join me? And the short story is I said yes. The long story is that we got to know each other a bit more. We worked on business plans. We worked on what we actually wanted to do and why we wanted to do it. And my personal view is that I was kind of fed up with, and this, bear in mind, this was 12 years ago, that sustainability I didn't think was being considered properly or appropriately, and it wasn't. It certainly wasn't considered as a professional service, and there was an opportunity to address that and bring a business to the real estate investment market to advise on ESG strategy, because we did believe even back then that there was a link between value and sustainability performance. So you can see my details there. I'm a chartered environmentalist, member of the relevant institutes, etc. When we launched EVORA, we from the start, Chris and I remember that very first meeting when Chris came up to sort of spend a bit of time with me and met my wife, and then I did the same thing with him. We talked about exit, we talked about growth, and it being something that we recognised from the outset that we could take it so far, but you need investment to grow from a geographical perspective. Certainly from a software investment perspective, we need support and growth there. So the first 3 years of EVORA were 3 or 4 years of EVORA were fun. It was kind of like three guys with a laptop and a mobile phone each and sitting at people's kitchen tables, and then slowly got a very small office in Vauxhall, and then moved around. We started bringing people in very cautiously, perhaps too cautiously. That was kind of one of the mistakes I'd say we've made. We should have probably done it a bit quicker on opportunities, and then 3 years in, we were starting to see an opportunity around software and around tech. This is sort of data that collects sustainability information from buildings and enables the investors in those buildings to understand and ultimately incorporate into investment decision-making processes. So we built Sierra, which is our software platform, and continues to grow that. And probably about 5 years in, 6 years in, I think Charlie, we spoke, and we were looking at the time for investment into the software, only into the software process. So Charlie took us around a few, introduced us to.
Well, you actually met Chris.
Yeah.
Don't look at him.
To a number of people, and that was my very first. That was Chris. That was my very first exposure to BE. Right, so
Only got better at it.
But it was kind of interesting because we did have a preconceived prejudice against products. It's not, and not from that.
We did.
And so another challenge that started to happen around, we'd got to a certain scale where in in 2020, 2021, we're starting to be approached on an almost regular basis, mostly by trade businesses who were, yeah, we'd like to buy you, we'd like to invest in you, buy you, come and join us. And it started to get very interesting, and yeah, we said no, but we need to think about this appropriately. Spoke to Charlie, spoke to Richard, and Polestar's advice was, well, look, don't just make a decision on the first or second offer that comes to you. Let's objectively do this properly, and sort of that we consider an approach that we followed through. And it wasn't just Polestar, you know, we tested, we talked to others. And then we went through a deal process which involved preparation of an initial taster, and then a more detailed IM investment memorandum. And then from that process, we went out. We very carefully selected Polestar's support a number of potential investors on both the trade and the private equity side to put in initial offers for the business. We got a lot of interest. We then went through a process of kind of fine tuning and filtering out and speaking to people and starting to talk. And we squeezed it down to six, 3 trade, 3 private equity, who we went through.
Yeah.
One. Oh, okay.
American ones.
2. Okay. So 4 and 2 then. Okay. Still with a bias, so internally in EVORA with a trade focus, trade bias, and we went to the process of having investor presentations, and this was guided by the guys at Polestar in terms of the preparation, but it was very much a two-way thing. So we presented our business to the prospective investors. We also wanted to hear from the investors what they were going to do with EVORA, how their view, their way of working, their concept, their approach. Bridges went first. I remember. We're first up on the first list, and we at the end of that process, then we got to know each other a bit more. So we went out immediately afterwards for a meal. We sort of.
I think just to repeat what Carmelo did, we did the same exactly the same on this Carmelo. There was a meal with everybody. Yeah. And it was quite interesting because one of the businesses we thought would be really good, there was just dreadful chemistry over dinner.
Wasn't it?
And yeah, it wasn't really brilliant chemistry in there. Shane did enjoy the shrimp. But it was, yeah, there was on one. There was just awful. Chris, the CEO and your co-shareholder, didn't get on with one of the characters at all. No. It was
awkward.
Awkward, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's worth investing in that. Don't just have a presentation. Do go out and see people. Do get to know them.
I mean, cultural fit is so important. Yeah. I mean, it was highlighted by Carmelo, but yeah, we work on an ongoing basis, and the involvement and engagement with Emma and the team at Bridges and the other investors in EVORA is on a, you're going to be working with them very closely for the next 5 years or so. So to understand that and understand that you can culturally work together, and your kind of your cultural mindset is aligned, at least, or closely aligned, and that's really important.
Yeah, we just and sorry to cut in, but I think the thing that what perfectly demonstrates that point in terms of getting out there meeting with folks is we acquired a handful of firms in the height of COVID in 2020, never having met the firms. And we've done 6 acquisitions, and I'd say all but maybe 3 or 4 have worked out really well. And of those 4 that haven't worked out well, 2 of them were firms that we had never met. And we closed on transactions during COVID, just doing deals over Teams. And when we actually met the group, we went, down to where their offices were, and culturally it was, there was an insane amount of hierarchy. The owner of the business had used a few terms that were frankly derogatory. We would have never, they would have never passed the you know, the cultural diligence check had we just met them in person. So it's for us, it's the most important thing you have to do is meet the team, kind of see how they interact, and you know, that cultural fit is just, it's paramount.
Yeah, I think one other point that I should have mentioned at the start is there are several reasons for why we went through this process, and one was, yes, absolutely, we wanted to de-risk. We wanted to take some money off the table, and you know, we put 10 years of work into this, blood, sweat and tears, lots and lots of, you know, days, hours and weekends worked. And so that was important, but we also wanted to grow, and we saw an opportunity, and we firmly believe that EVORA could grow and build and make a difference from an impact perspective. And so when we were going through this process of interviewing, we were looking at the prospective organisations that bid to assess, to evaluate how that connection could work, how that could drive forwards. Yep, and as it says, we got we went through that process. We got to a stage where we narrowed it down to two, and Bridges and a trade purchaser, and had further, more detailed discussions around that. That's, I think, where the advice and the support that Polestar and as an advisor sort of helped us from a fine tuning of that position, and also, you know, to add to complexity, we saw an opportunity where bringing another organisation into the mix in terms of effectively a consortium organisation. So EVORA, that other organisation was MSCI, because one of the key reasons for us is we like the way that MSCI dealt with data. They were US based, or they have a strong US presence, so that really helped. So we thought that MSCI and Bridges partnership can really help us grow and help us build and develop that. So we worked very closely with Bridges, MSCI, and Charlie and Richard and the team at Polestar to sort of build that and create that structure that worked for us, enabled us to kind of to grow and build, and will enable us to grow and build going forwards. And we were guided through that process. We completed on the 7th of October last year, 2022. In terms of what didn't necessarily go well, I wouldn't. It's not a smooth process. There are ups and downs over that process. It took us, near enough a year to sort of get there. Everything that's been said about preparation, about preparing your business beforehand, is absolutely 100% valid. I wouldn't say we were rubbish and we were all over the place, but we weren't ready for sale on day one. You know, we didn't have the structure of the documents. I think the other thing that has run true is that as a kind of leadership organisation, we had a board previously, pre-investment. That board was made up of one accountant and a bunch of experienced ESG professionals. We weren't functionally defined. We didn't have a clear delineated accountability, which we've had to sort of build into the structure. And so by not being, I wouldn't say, we weren't sitting back in our chairs, not doing anything. We had the day job, but by being less prepared than we possibly could have, it took more time especially during the due diligence phase, in terms of pulling the evidence together, putting information that was needed together, and responding to the obvious sensible questions that we had.
And I think that made life quite hard for the investors too. Yeah, because you couldn't prove things that everyone knew was probably the case, but it made it very hard to prove it.
Yeah.
So that getting ready helps you help the investor or the buyer get to where everybody wants to get to. That's one of the reasons we had the delay.
And that led to a longer process, which led to more time-consuming process.
Yeah, and in fact, possibly, and of course, that if you got a long process, one of the issues on this deal was a huge amount of interest on a business that was growing at 50% per annum top line. So trying to keep these guys working on their business and not working on the deal which is part of the reason why the accounting functions had never caught up, right? Because it started off with Randy doing it at the kitchen table, right? And it was just trying to catch up with it. It's very, very hard. So
But you grew revenue and headcount 100%, didn't you?
Yeah.
Before.
We
Yeah.
did.
It was
yeah,
slightly terrifying.
yeah. So getting your systems and KPIs and all the stuff we spoke about earlier in place was just really hard, and you guys understood that, right?
Yeah.
But it did mean we had to go through a bit of a process. So the more you can do to get that ready, if you are going to, the more important it is.
And I think for us, the kind of excitement is in that kind of collaborative kind of view and gaining the benefit and the experience from the people that our investors are able to sort of bring to the table. And so now we've got a more clearly defined vision and structure where provide strategy support for real estate investment companies. That strategy support leads to ongoing repeatable advisory work, all of which is underpinned by software. So you've got a strategy funnel, high value, kind of one-off engagements which feed into repeatable income and supported by software. And with backing and structure from Emory too.
Okay, thank you. So there we are, four perspectives for you.
Sorry, Charlie, I haven't mentioned the last bullet point.
Go for it.
Very, very small detail, but when people tell you on signing day that it's going to take a lot of time, it is going to take a lot of time. So
Signing day, was that a day, was it?
Well, it was the evening, wasn't it?
No, it was. It's 2 a.m. to go knock on your neighbour's door.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, you need witnesses, remember that. Need to be witness. Yeah. You got a very nice bottle of wine from it. So,
Yeah. It was you to drive your mother-in-law home because you brought the
she
wrong
stayed over in the end.
Could you do me a favour, Ollie? Could you click on to the next slide? So something we've been working on, and it won't be for all the people in this room, but we found, so let's call it 20, what is that, 6 falls, 20, yeah, so it's 24 areas in a business where they fall under this: quality of earnings, where they sit within your market, what your business processes are, what your model is, your people, and your financial situation, financial strength. And we're going to start mapping people within those 24 areas on a score of sort of 1 to 7, and 1 would be on the outside and 7 would be in the middle. And our view is that if you've got anything that's outside that ring that's got minimum requirements in it, you're probably not going to be able to do a deal. However good your business is, you're probably not going to be able to do a deal. So that could be reliance on a key individual, unless you've got a really special niche, or you found a special buyer who happens to have somebody who can go into it, or you've got a 60% customer concentration. So there are going to be various areas, or you can't produce any accounts, right? But there might be a buyer for your business out there, but there's not going to be a decent pool for you to be able to draw to. So we want to be working with people saying, so let's do this now, right? Now, what changes do you need to make to your business to take them from here to here? And that's on the, and that this is kind of halfway through or 3/4 of the way through the process. And the value of your business will increase as you drive towards the middle. Yeah, so you get much better scalability. You've got great systems in place for training people. You've got your ESG policies are right. You've got a really nice market niche. You can see where you're going. There's lots of white space, that kind of thing. So this is sort of something we're developing, but actually it's a good way to think of your business. Is what are the things that are going to stop someone buying a business if you walk in the front door? And we kind of come to this by looking at deals that we've quite frankly not got over the line, and thought, why have we not got, people come to us with what looks like a really good deal, and everyone goes, yeah, we know we've got this issue with this business, but it's a fantastic business and someone's going to look through it. And every so often someone does, but normally no one looks through it.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely valuable process to go through. I've sold Access as a dream investment, but when we were doing that deal, they had over 180 days of debtors on their balance sheet, and we could not for the life of us figure out whether there was a hole in the P&L or whether it was just a really crappy debt collection system going on. And I had to get, fortunately, the FDD partner was a friend, and between us, we bullied the investment committee, and I sort of had to hold my nose and step over the line. Unfortunately, we were right. There was no hole in the P&L. Those debtors were collected out in time, but it probably delayed the process by 2 months, and the risk of it not completing was massive at that point, because for a really easily fixable point. Pay 2 people to come in for 2 months and just collect your debts. You know, it's some stuff is just that simple.
Yeah.
Fix it, tidy it up, take the time, and the whole thing becomes easier.
So that's kind of that's it for the people talk. So open the floor to any questions. So has anyone got a question, or should we go with the question, how many deals have you done where the aim was to try and save costs out of it and bang 2 things together? I'd be interested to, let's answer that question. So Chris.
No, thanks. As a platform, none.
Yeah.
So we invest in businesses that we are expecting to grow. But there are bolt-ons we've done to our portfolio companies where part of the logic to what you're doing is that we're doing a roll-up of translation businesses at the moment, and there is an element of cost out or rationalization onto different software platforms, and rationalization of finance function is a key part of that, because we're trying to buy, effectively, if you want to do it, the phrase, mom and pop operators, bring them in, scale into being a mid-market provider. And in that type of situation, you know, you shouldn't be afraid of considering that. Now, as a combined business over time, we have more people than we had from all of the individual aggregate businesses, but they'll just be people in the right place and cost in the right place. But if you are talking to an investor and you think that their motivation on day one when you're doing the transaction is to take cost out, it's like madness.
Yeah, okay, all of that. I mean, we're normally writing a business plan or a business plan that has a significant cost investment in the first year, because, as Chris said earlier, you're going to have to make probably at least 2 or 3 senior hires to build out the senior team. And there'll probably be another shopping list of other stuff that's needed. So we factor that into the business plan and valuation, but it's definitely not taking cost out.
Can I just add that this was the, you know, that question is the perceived fear that we had.
Yeah,
And just why you asked it.
It's private equity. If you stop and think about private equity, you think about private equity firms buying boots, private equity firms buying large organisations, and there the private equity model is to find assets and be able to improve their metrics across the board, and a lot of that comes with cost out. We are growth investors. That's what we exist to do. It's why I do the job. I'm sure it's why Emma does the job. It's what we get a kick out of. I wish I was an entrepreneur. I'm not brave enough, but it's about, you know, we find these businesses where we want to invest, and the only way you can get an SME growing is by putting more cash into them to accelerate, provide more fuel for fun.
So Carmelo, what's your, you know, you're in a slightly different position, right?
Yeah.
So good to hear how that worked. Yeah, 40 bolt-ons.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, to say that we've never had a redundancy, being, you know, almost 2,000 employees when we're acquiring firms that on average are 30 or 40 employees would be a lie. Most of the time that where there is a redundancy, it's typically in a administrative function or a corporate function, such as finance, accounting, FP&A, marketing, business development, technology, you name it. And I think you know what to look out for if you are talking to an acquirer like us is hey, you know, you have that corporate staff. What are your plans for our corporate staff? How will you treat them upon a redundancy? You know, what's the transition going to be like for them? Is it just going to be, hey, the deal's closed and sorry, you no longer have a position? Or will there be a transition period of a month, 2 months, 3 months with, you know, benefits provided thereafter? You know, acquirers should be really thoughtful around redundancies. So we never go into a transaction simply with the thesis of we're cutting costs out to make a return. In fact, I think that's a pretty silly way to make return on any investment. But to the extent that there are redundant roles, it just makes sense, not only for us as the acquirer, but for the person where they do have that role and they'd be joining us. It's like, who wants to be sitting around doing nothing? It's not good for a career. So as long as you treat them with respect and you have confidence that the acquirer has a good plan around it, it's sort of just part of the selling process. You just have to get comfortable with it, because not every single acquirer is going to have a role for every single person, especially those in administrative roles.
So has anyone got a follow-on question from that, or any other questions they might have they want to ask?
So Charlie and Carmelo, question around purchase price and what are you seeing in terms of upfront versus deferred payment?
Yeah.
Be interested to hear your views in terms of where do you see the market in terms of percentage, what that breaks down,
Mm-hmm.
and then in terms of what is a reasonable time horizon for the deferred component.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, around the deferred component, do you normally see conditionality? How much is variable, how much is fixed, etc.?
Yep. Great question. So first of all, I think that the industry in which the acquisition is occurring in is really important, right? If it's a IP centric business, kind of pure play technology, there's very unlikely, there's not as much of a need to structure so much of the transaction. Right, you're buying a piece of technology. A lot of the times it's maybe recurring revenue in nature. The ownership perhaps isn't as important to the continued growth and success of the business. But in my world, in the professional services world, the assets that we are acquiring in these transactions are the people and their relationships. So it's important to structure a transaction in a way where, of course, you're able to take the proverbial chips off the table, or some chips off the table today, and still, get another bite at the apple in a couple years. Because as a private equity owned firm, there's an exit every few years for us and our ownership. So, the way we structure transactions, and has been successful for us, and I think many other firms would likely agree in the professional services world, is a majority of the deal should be in cash. 50% plus. We actually kind of try to target something more like 70% in cash. The remaining 30 to 40% for us is in equity in our firm. Of course, as a fast growing firm, that equity is a lot more expensive than cash. If your equity is doubling or tripling or quadrupling over a 5-year period, that means that the deal becomes more expensive. That being said, it keeps the ownership and founders motivated to continue to come to work, to grow our share price together. So it's a vital component of the transaction. And I actually expect the split to move a little bit more towards equity heavy deals with a little bit less cash, because many acquirers they do lever up to do deals, and interest rates are really high right now. So there's less of an appetite to have such a majority of the transaction in cash when to borrow now is really expensive. And then the final component, which you were referring to in terms of contingent payment, I saw a lot of contingent payments during COVID. So firms maybe had a few months of virtually no revenue and said, hey, I still want to get paid on what I did in 2019. But 2020 was an anomaly because the world shut down. So we had earnouts structured in 2021 to make up for maybe the loss of profits in 2020, and every single one of them did end up hitting it. But now we really only structure earnouts, and I see earnout driven businesses in a few cases. Number one is when a business is growing pretty significantly and doesn't just want to get paid off of current year earnings, but hey, we're growing at 20%. If I just wait a year, I could make not only a better multiple for the business, but I'll get paid on a higher profit. So every once in a while, we'll kind of structure it so that there could be another 10 or 20% of proceeds on top of what the purchase price is at close. Or as I mentioned earlier, you could have a tremendous business that is really profitable, growing quickly, but has such client and project concentration that we want that assurance that the revenue is going to be there in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So we may have multi-tiered earnouts in that case to say, and those would be very heavy earnout deals, earnout centric deals, because the fact of the matter is if you have 80% of your revenue in one client, that revenue could fall off of a cliff tomorrow, and we just paid for nothing. So in that case, we may have, you know, a 5-year tiered earnout transaction where the earnout makes up more than 50% of the overall proceeds. So hopefully that's a helpful answer. There's a lot that plays into it, as you can tell. But if I had to handicap it in terms of our average transaction, what I see in the professional services world, you should be getting, you know, 50 to 70% cash, the rest in equity. And if there is an earnout component, but you have a stable business, it should be, you know, for kind of over performance and not a huge amount of the deal, unless there are those extenuating circumstances that I mentioned earlier. I welcome the thoughts of anybody else in the room, though.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's useful. I should have clarified indeed that I'm thinking about it in the context of an acquisition by a strategic. So
yeah,
more, you know, think about a big company buying a small consulting company as a niche in whatever market. So but I take it basically that when you say 50 to 70% cash, that is effectively upfront cash.
Upfront cash. I mean, in our case, we like to say, I mean, it's riskless cash unless unless there's something else going on. But you know, you deserve, in our opinion, to get paid for what you've built. You deserve to be able to take take chips off the table at the close of the deal.
Great, thank you.
Emma, have you made? Thank you, Carmelo. Emma, have you had bolt-ons on the stuff you've been working on? Interesting to know how that's been for you.
Yes, so that's topical for where I'm thinking about an exciting one at the moment, and that is much more of a strategic acquisition, and actually much more of a kind of roll-in equity-led deal. And then actually on talking talents, again, we're very actively thinking about acquisitions. I'd say that's quite a range, and it's completely situation dependent in terms of whether it's a sort of founder transition cash deal where the founders are looking for a succession plan and want to exit, in which case it is largely cash, but it's phased over a sort of transition period, or whether it is actually much more of a sort of strategic merger, in which case it's largely sort of equity focused. So I can't really give a kind of one size fits all approach.
Thank you. And Chris, you mentioned you made a couple of acquisitions there at Singapore, but and you have other platforms you make bolt-ons too.
We are using them as part of it. But getting less than 50% of the cash on day one, it feels like something's gone a bit wrong with the structure, I think. So we're typically paying more than 50% of the cash up front, and then it depends on the scale of the business you're buying. If it's really small, then it's going to be more of an earnout. Do you want those people to hang around? I'm talking to one of my companies at the moment where we're looking to make our first acquisition. And I'm just trying to remind the board that as a buyer, the single most important fact we've got to try and work out is what is it we want these vendors who are bringing into our business to do on the other side? What are the actions and the attitudes that we want to persuade them to undertake on the other side of the deal? And what's therefore the right mechanism to put in place to achieve that? Try not to think about it purely financially. Think about it sensibly and strategically. If I want them to be brought into cross-selling within the group, I need to have an incentive that makes that happen and sees them benefit for doing so. You can't just rely on human nature. You've got to actually put in place an incentive plan and incentive structure that makes that happen. So we're on that one. We started off saying, should we roll them into group equity? Should we just buy 70% of that subsidiary and then have a buy-in right on the remaining equity at some time in the future? Or do we use an earnout? And we're trying to work out the best thing to do. But if you're going to sell your business control, get 50% of the cash or don't do it.
Great, thank you.
Something you'll be able to find.
So the advice we give people when you get these earnouts is what is the cash you're going to get? If that's all you end up with, is that going to give you what you need? If you're selling your business to a child, for instance, because if it isn't, And then the argument back the other way is, well, if it all goes horribly wrong anyway, then you still end up owning a business that hasn't been done the same, so you bank the cash. But we do have this discussion quite a lot with people about earnouts. And there's a massive pushback against earnouts because people see them as a bad thing, right? But actually, the situation Carmelo was alluding to, which is a very fast-growing business, an earnout could be quite a positive thing. So people say to me, I don't want an earnout. And I'll say, okay, so someone comes and offers you £15 million in cash for your business, and someone offers you £10 million in cash for your business, and a 10 million earnout. Yeah? That's a more complicated question to answer, isn't it? Because which bit between 10 and 15 million are you willing to risk for the additional 15, for instance? So it's rarely do we get bids that are well matched in that regard. So you're having to have a bit of debate about where it sits. So if you excuse me on this one, on EVORA, we had a bid which had a really high top end, yeah, but it had an earnout attached to it. And that became quite interesting because then we saw the bid from Bridges. Right? Actually, if you hit the earnout, then actually what would that look like in a private equity situation? Well, you could end up being better off in a private equity situation if you do what you need to do to hit the earnout. Yeah. So you need to do quite a lot of work when you get the earnouts to work out to try and get the offers comparable, to be honest.
I think the point that Carmelo made about the cost of capital is very valid in all types of deal structuring. Certainly within private equity, particularly when you move above us in scale terms. Bank debt cost is so much materially higher than it was 2 years ago. The deal structure has changed a lot. So we haven't actually seen headline pricing, EVs particularly change, but we have seen the way the deals are being structured change. Vendors being asked to leave money back in to sort of provide some bridging bank debt or a bit of earnout or rolling into the equity. And we're having to be more creative about how we structure the deals in order to have a bit of risk share in an environment where I just raised some bank debt into one of our companies to help with some acquisitions. It's costing 11%. You know, it's making me feel cheap, and I don't mind that feeling.
You're never cheap.
That thing.
Has it answered your
Yes,
yeah.
that was great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think probably substantially answered, but probably from the experience roundtable, it sounds like a lot of success in turning these acquisitions into real growth stories. All of the literature says that actually the success rate of these things tends to be quite low. So I'm just wondering, what's your secret sauce? What are the key kind of value drivers and success drivers for companies you've acquired and the relationships that you've built that we should be looking to prepare for?
I think the stat is definitely true. I think the stat is more focused on companies buying companies rather than the private equity initial investment. So we're set up as investors to align ourselves with the management team to create that sort of continuity through a deal. I think the place that we're really focused once we've got a platform is when we're doing M&A, when we're buying bolt-ons into companies, you know, what Carmelo's doing for a living, and what we're doing with bolting on. That's where we see the real risk. And what we're pushing our portfolio companies to do, really detailed 100-day plans, proper accountability for who's taking ownership of what, how are we going through this integration phase, you know, how are we going to get these systems talking to each other? Those are the big risk areas where you can just see value leak. And, you know, we're in private equity and, you know, former investment bankers, we're quite good at talking ourselves up. We've all had deals that happen where value was leaked away because we haven't been through that process right. And one of my least successful deals was a carve out from a PLC where we tried to do the private equity thing and just put it out. Massive miscalculation in terms of the complexity of separating that business out of its parent, and we just saw value leaking because we couldn't get it out. We couldn't get it as a standalone business because we hadn't done the planning properly, and it was an error that could have been avoided like up front. So does that go to the
It was interesting. Again, you teamed up with IT investor called Farview, yeah, and a guy was very focused on that 100-day plan with you guys. You know, he was leading that. And interesting, how was that for you? Sat on the other side of that 100-day plan.
Because
you know, that's the important point. Right?
well, not just the 100-day plan, but the evolution into the transformation plan. It's challenge. There's a lot to do. You know, we're taking a business that has been run in a certain way by, you know, use the term mom and pop business, not quite mom and pop business, but informally, to really create formal structures, change the way that we think, whilst at the same time retaining the culture. And that, you know, our staff call themselves, we haven't done this, the leadership haven't done this, but they call themselves EVORians, and that's the kind of, you know, we want that glue, we want to maintain that kind of special sauce, whilst putting the structures to enable scalability and grow, us to scale and grow. And so it's so the 100-day plan, then the wider sort of transformation program that we've kind of that's evolved into sort of continues. It's why I'm still here, to be honest. You know, I had a number of, you know, when I was looking at options, one of the things was, what am I going to do after this? I changed my mind. You know, to be perfectly honest, I changed my mind partway through. So my initial plan was, right, that'll do. I'll be out and so on. But it was the vision, the partnership, the engagement that we had, and that, not just the 100-day plan, but where that led us to, was really exciting for me. I wanted to be part of it.
So I think if what I'm hearing, right, and I think it's not a surprise, is discipline, right? So if we are disciplined in when we're trying to buy something, and we look at it and realise it's the wrong thing to do, it's the discipline to say it's the wrong thing to do, yeah, and it's the discipline of putting the effort in before we do the deal to make sure that we're ready for what's going to happen, have considered various things that might happen afterwards, and not just expect it to happen. And probably, if you're buying a business for the first time, I would say to it, might be advised on it by somebody. Yeah, because I think so many people will buy businesses from someone they know and expect it all just to happen. Yeah, and there's a lot that can go wrong. Yeah, because we don't fully understand everybody's motivations on the other side of what's driving them. And those motivations, and how will those motivations change?
I think change is an important point. As you go through the process, you'll be gleaning extra bits of information. So if you've got a list of half a dozen things or 10 things that you think are really important and key, make sure those are ticked off, but keep revisiting them as you go through, because actually some of them you may go, actually, that's not an issue at all. And other bits you may go dig off to the side and you go, actually, that looks a bit dodgy. You know, just get really comfortable before you start, you know, signing the last bits of paper that Paul was talking about.
So we're just in the process of our advice on not to do a deal with advising. I think it'd be wrong for them. We did it. In fact, I did it a few years ago. That was painful. That was a very painful experience. It would have been a pretty big fee, and it was just the wrong thing for them to do. So but it's just having the balls to walk away from a deal sometimes. And our job when we're selling a business is to get people to think they can't walk away from it. You want to get deal frenzy going on, dragged into it, right? That's our job. And then the same time when you're buying is not to be dragged into it.
Yeah, the momentum's quite a powerful feature, I suspect, in some of the numbers from the studies that you're doing, because if you build positive momentum, so you do the proper preparation up front, and all the news that's coming through, if you're on the sell side, is positive, then everybody gets comfortable and more comfortable through the process, and that's all good news. If you start getting some negative bits because you haven't thought through an aspect properly, that can spin it the opposite way. And if you're acquiring, you should be taking a step back, maybe have a separate team or separate few people that you're sort of thinking about. We'd say an advisor, but if you've got other parties that are a bit more remote, perhaps a non-exec director or whatever, and revisit and re-challenge, because that's a model all the private equity houses have. They'll have a separate investment committee, which will have people sitting on it asking those challenging questions that they've got to get past the investment committee.
Nobody else has?
Yeah, okay.
Another one. So, Carmelo, you mentioned that scale is a pretty good predictor of multiple, right? Can you talk a little bit about sort of ranges for different levels? Where are the breakpoints and conclusions along those lines?
Yeah, of course. And I certainly don't mean to be prescriptive in terms of scale being the only variable, right? I think there's a lot that goes into it. First of all, industry, of course, plays into it. They're hotter industries that command higher multiples because of whatever reason. There's a lot more venture capital money in it. There's more private equity money in it. SaaS 10 years ago, for example, businesses were trading at 20 times revenue. They still are, some of them. So it's not just scale, but if you kind of look in any specific industry, generally speaking, the bigger the business is, the higher the multiple. And again, I'll just kind of speak from what I see in my world. All other things being equal, you have a steady grower, good margins in that 20% plus range. The bands that I kind of see it broken up into is the sub 5. Well, first I'll go really small. Kind of sub 3 million is the first band, and frankly, there aren't many businesses out there that are looking to acquire businesses of that size. I don't know, Charlie.
Or EBITDA?
Revenue. Yeah. There are acquirers out there that will do that, us being one of them, because we have a dedicated corporate development team. But I think there are very few businesses out there that have the resources that we do to do really small bolt-ons like that. The next band that I see is in the 3 to 10 million range of revenue. That's really where we play, as an example. And the multiple ranges there are generally in the mid single digits, call it 5 to 7 times. And then once you start getting into double digit revenues with strong, with those steady growers and good margin, is when you start to see multiples creep into the low teens or high single digits in terms of EBITDA. This is all professional services, and what I've seen, and because we've seen, I don't know, hundreds of transactions brought over to us and have bid on as many and lose some of them and win a bunch of them. Those are the break points that I see. And then we have done a handful of deals that are kind of greater than 50 million of revenue, and that's when you start seeing those definite teen to mid-teen multiples, where you have 50, 100 plus of revenue at 20% plus EBITDA margins and growing. You've proven that you have the scale. You've been able to do it profitably. At least in what I've seen is certainly a teens type multiple. But I just want to disclaim it one more time. I mean, if you have a heavy focus on what is the flavor of the day, today it's things like cybersecurity and ESG, which there's been a lot of talk about. Those command higher multiples, right? There's a lot of focus on that. It's what private equity and investors and venture capital investors want, and they're going to throw more money at it. It's just the reality. So again, curious to hear the others in the room if they've kind of different experience, but that's my experience, having looked at a number of deals in the professional services space at JS Held, and like I said, I was a technology investment banker prior to that, so that's the other viewpoint that I bring to the table.
More in terms of EBITDA profit, we're buying in the 1 to 5, 1 to 4 million profit range, and for a professional services business that doesn't have technology sitting behind it, then we're typically paying about 8 times. It can be a bit higher, it can be a bit lower. If it's a business making 2 million, it's probably in the 6 and 7 bracket. Our aim is to get our businesses 5 to 10 of EBITDA profit and up towards the 10. And if we do that, then they go for double digit into low teens if we find the right buyer. And always the margin basically rather than that. If it's a 5 to 10% margin business, it's going to be low. But that's a couple of those deals that were on my slide have been done in recent years. They've been at about that 8 times type level for good quality businesses. None of them are perfect. They will inform investment. They will require some help. But often that margin drops before it kicks on again through the investment phase.
Yeah, I think that sort of threshold of probably a couple of million of EBITDA is really important, because that's where you can see that consistent cash and profit generation, where even if you then throw in a few extra heads, you're not just kind of destroying margins and kind of completely changing the model. So that's why we get very focused on that sort of minimum level. And we find that just the smaller the business, the more fragile it is and the harder it is to often to scale or withstand any unexpected curveballs as well, which goes to that kind of scale.
I think you're pretty close anyway, because just applying, say, 20+% margin, you're pretty much saying the same thing.
But took the words out of my mouth, right? We look at revenue bands with the, like I said, permission to play is a profitable kind of 20, if 10, 15, 20% plus. So that it equates to exactly what the folks in the room are saying.
Have we got one more burning question from anyone?
I'll throw it in. I was curious that MSCI were part of the acquirers from EVORA, because you don't think of them as a natural acquirer of businesses. How did that come about?
They were an original bidder.
Were they really?
Yeah, they were one of the final six.
Interesting.
We approached them off the back of the data that was coming out of the Sierra software. So that's how we get into the bidding process.
Right. That's really imaginative.
But actually, I think this, you raise a really good point, which is you should be talking to a broad range of people when you come to sell your business. People you may not necessarily be thinking about. We did speak to Moody's and S&P, and we spoke to Accenture, and we spoke to KPMG. KPMG were really interested, right? So you've got to be thinking, who are all the different people who might have an interest in this? And what was interesting was that I think the reason we ended up with these guys, much better than me on this now. The reason we ended up with MSCI was there was a really good reason from the buyer. And when we were meeting with them, they kind of saw there was a really good meeting from the buyer, but there was a bit of a concern: how's the consulting business going to fit within this? But how about we take the really good reason and apply that to a different deal? Yeah, and
It's where this consortium approach works so well, isn't it?
But it was bloody hard work. I mean, you were carrying your hair out, weren't you? Because
it didn't make my life very easy.
No, I made that down to say, look, we've got an idea. It's Sunny. This is one of the guys in the business, really sort of bright guy, who was thinking of great things, right? And I sort of said it to Emma, and Emma was like, I don't want to think about it. And then we came out. I think I can see that can work pretty much. Wasn't it? It was a day or two later, but it did make the deal much more complicated.
Sure.
Because actually they could ultimately be a buyer, particularly the technology bit of this business. So of course they want to get first dibs. You can't do that, right? Because everyone else has got to have an equal relative. So there's a massive bun fight over that. Then you got well, how are we going to work together? And I think we spent more time negotiating the contract between MSCI and EVORA than we did on any other legal documentation at all, wasn't it? It was.
Well, which you haven't looked at since.
Which of course nobody's ever going to look at since, not they? Right. So yes, you could end up with an imaginative solution to but be aware that simple is often best.
And has it worked?
It's working and building. So just last week we spent our entire revenue team, sales team, which is new, by the way. We didn't have this before. This is part of the scale. So, previously it was me and a couple of other guys who were doing it. So we built a function, spent an entire afternoon with the MSCI team to sort of build those relationships and effectively using the MSCI as our extended sales force. So it's we are getting deals we are getting work through from that team, and there's a strategy and a build plan from there.
Nice. Thank you.
There's nothing more that I like than a simple transaction, reaching out to a potential seller, and they don't run a process and we win immediately. But you're doing yourself a disservice as a seller of a business, not engaging folks like Charlie to reach out to a broader. I'm not saying a crazy broad list, but a broader list of potential suitors for the business, and somebody that can help you be creative to find whatever the best path is for your business. So that's like I said, that comes from a place of it's actually counter to what I want as a buyer, but as somebody who's advised folks who have sold, that's really important.
Yeah, and but just going back, but you actually introduced us to a lot. You know, you actually sent someone to us, didn't you?
We did, yeah.
Did you want them to be ready to buy?
That's we had acquired a business that Polestar had advised on, and then they introduced us to another business, and I couldn't make sense of their numbers. So I just said, here, why don't you engage Polestar? And they actually went out to, you know, I believe to a few other acquirers, which we were fine with, because at least we had the stamp of approval from a firm that had, you know, was able to figure out what the numbers were, properly diligence it, and you know, they just made the process smooth. So yeah, okay, you have to pay a banker a fee, but they bring a lot more to the table than the fee that you're paying them, whether it be an increase in purchase price or just how much smoother they make the process. That's my shameless plug.
Thank you for the
Polestar.
advertisement. Is that the right way of saying it?
Should I send you my address for the bottle of wine that you now owe me, or?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Carmelo. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you sharing your time with us this afternoon or morning for you. Very much. Thank you all for joining us.
Bye.
And Nick for the room.